Why are you still going to the post office? Do it all online with Stamps.
Wherever you are, make it Truth Frequency Radio.
Coming to you live and direct from the phantom shores of the ghostly Hudson River. Yes, my name is Ra Castaldo, and I'm here to awaken those particles spiraling, those dormant particles inside your DNA. So come with me as we go further down this mystic spiral of life inside the Eye of Ra. Each and every week we unveil those different shades of you, different shades of me, until we all are vibrating the truth frequency. Welcome everybody to the Truth Frequency Radio Network. Of course, my name is Ra Castaldo. You can find me at the mysticalspiralstore.com, and you could find our wonderful guest tonight, Mr. Peter Moon, at timetraveleducationcenter.com. Of course, Peter is a world-renowned author and researcher and experiencer, and he is experienced and well-versed in a wide variety of topics. So the topics and conversation could go anywhere tonight. And I don't know where the time went, because I checked, it's been like about 4 years since the last time I interviewed this man, and I'm really excited to have him back on the show. I can't believe it's been that long. Peter, before I bring Peter on, you guys might have heard of the Montauk Project, Experiments of Time. He's the original author that brought this information about the Montauk Project, along with Preston Nichols back in the day. And many have tried to imitate, but you cannot duplicate the original man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Peter Moon. So I'm very happy to be able to spend some time with him here tonight, and I'm glad he agreed to come back on. Peter, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Nice.
Well, welcome back, my friend.
Thank you.
How you been? I can't believe it's been that long.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that long ago, but all is well. All is well. I think what might be, since it's been so long, you might start by giving a summary of where we left off, so that I can then pick up from there. You might just tell your audience about what you last remember about our last show or whatnot, and where it's gone from there, because certainly there have been 4 years worth of experience. And
yeah,
folks.
I mean, it's amazing too, because there's a lot of new people out there listening. So many people have not heard our previous discussions, and I think it's very interesting now that the time period that we have relinked to have another show, because we're at a transformation. Everybody feels that these are very important times. And I think a lot of things that, and especially a lot of information that you've been discussing, and a few others out there for years, are more important now than ever. And there are certain places that I feel are related to that. And one of them happens to be that area of Long Island that even you were one of the first to start reporting about. Or at least, bringing this knowledge back into the collective consciousness of humanity that has been buried for a while, and certain people that have refound certain things that were laying there, that previous civilizations have found before us, like certain power spots, certain sacred power spots on the planet, on our sort of harmonic energy grid, if you want to say. And I think one of those places is Montauk. And I think that the times that we're living now, I truly think, Peter, that we are with this winter solstice recently, we're truly like in the age of Aquarius, as they say. And with the certain technologies that's evolving on our planet and the times that's happening, whether people want to call it a Kali Yuga or however you want to look at it, there is some sort of rebirth and transformation happening. And I think it's awakening as technologies come again on this planet. It's reawakening technologies that have been long buried beneath the sea, if you want to say in Atlantis and places like this, that we are sort of like living on the ceiling of Atlantis. You know, we're on top of the ceiling of Atlantis, and the ceiling of Atlantis is our ocean floor. And I think that whole mid-Atlantic ridge possibly was Atlantis beneath the sea, you know, and of course, Long Island and the Montauk area that we've talked about before would be part of ancient Atlantis, maybe. So do you think, from all your research and what you've reported, you think the Montauk Indians could be ancient descendants of Atlantis, and that they were actually on top of some sort of ancient Atlantean power spot in that area even?
Well, I've addressed this in my book, Montauk Book of the Living, which is, kind of a climax to all of the Montauk books that I wrote. It was actually the last Montauk book that I wrote. But
I have it. I have it here.
To address your question, is Atlantis is more properly thought of as a culture rather than as a location, as a culture, much as if you might say, let's just say for an example, the ancient Hebrew culture. The ancient Hebrew culture was a very diverse group of multiple ethnicities.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, if it was the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, it would be going from all the way near the Arctic Ocean all the way down to the end of South America. So, of course, we would have all different cultures, like all different diverse, yeah.
So Atlantis is more of a time period with actual aspects of it being highlighted or featured, just as if you were to read a history of the National Football League, certain teams would stand out more than others. In the same way, so do certain place names stand out more than others. So the most historical work that's been done on Atlantis is by a guy named Egerton Sykes, Sykes, Egerton, Egerton. And he wrote publications last century. He was a dowser, and he sought to chronicle every mention of Atlantis in all the literature he could find.
Do you know, Peter, how similar? Because I don't know that. I don't know too much about that person's name, but I'm familiar with some other people's info, like of those similar time periods, like Rudolf Steiner. Is it similar to Rudolf Steiner's info?
No. Steiner was somebody who was reading off the Akashic records.
Yeah.
And he therefore he mixes coherency with incoherency, at least from a logical point of view. Egerton Sykes was doing
a good point of view.
Historical records in books and literature. He wasn't putting his own
spin,
psychic sensitivity into the equation.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference, and he did this, and I was introduced to him by
how far back did he have records of information about this?
Whatever he could find in literature that was extant in literature. Now, I don't know which libraries he was using, but he was
Plato, etc.
Yeah, but much more than Plato. But British, he was British, so he was probably using the museum or the libraries in England. He operated out of France, so I don't know all of his language facilities, but he was very interesting to me because of his connection or his writing, and he didn't necessarily focus on this in exclusion to others, but he did mention the ancient priesthood of Ireland.
I wonder if he had Templar connections in his bloodline.
No. That's much later. That's much later. The Templars are much, much later. He's much more ancient than that, and he's talking about the settlement or the culture that migrated from what would have been Atlantis. The Blue Queen of Atlantis. Her name was Antenea, and she was of blue skin, which we would recognize now as Rh negative, and she migrated to the African, what we know now as the Sahara, which was a green, verdant land, a paradisical Eden-like land. And she came there, and she was known as the Kahina, the Blue Queen, is where we get the Hawaiian word kahuna, and or the Native American Cochina.
Yeah.
It's Kahina. So the more ancient term, at least according to this literature, was the Kahina, and it was come a Blue Queen who was Antenea. And Antenea is what the Greeks adapted into the goddess of wisdom, Athena, who gave mankind the olive. Now, Queen Antenea was the purveyor of the olive. She brought the olive to mankind. Isis was known as the Lady of the Olives. And the olive, of course, was of great interest to me because I had received news of the hospitalization and then death of Olive Pharaoh. Olive Pharaoh was the matriarch of the Montauk Indians, and I had sent her my book, Pyramids of Montauk, only to call her and find out if she received it, whereupon her cousin told me that she just got it today, but we just sent her to the hospital with a bleeding gallbladder. I would then go to my notes that I was studying, which I interrupted myself from to make the phone call, and saw that the olive was used in Atlantis to heal the gallbladder and would be used in the future to heal the gallbladder. Now, what's interesting about that is I wasn't even thinking her name was Olive, because I was studying a whole bunch of series of coincidences and synchronicities with the olive, which is a whole other story that the book goes into. But the olive was, and then her name was Olive. And then I would subsequently go on a quest where I would learn that this Blue Queen of Atlantis.
One of those spiritual omens for you. Yeah.
Oh, it was monumental, because my parents were killed in a car accident on Adobe Los Olivos, the land of the Adobe of the Olives. That was when I was 21, the Adobe of the Olives. So I didn't find this out till years later. I'm taking my daughter, driving by that area, taking her from my sister's house by that area, and seeing the turnoff where I remember going to my parents' funeral, and it said Adobe, Los Olivos Adobe. So I go, oh my God, here's the olives. So when I got home that evening, I started asking my sister, and she said, yeah, that was the biggest ranchero in California, the Olivos family. So my parents were killed and buried on what was the Rancho de los Olivos. And I had dreams of them. And also, but all of this kept stirring up and kicking me back in my dreams, because I would have these dreams of incredibly elaborate, what do you call them? These things that come off of highways. They call them clover leaves. And this was in the city of Ventura, where my parents lived at the time they were killed in Southern California. And I was getting these ornate, like it was just beautiful. So this is far more beautiful than it actually is. It's beautiful, but not as beautiful as my dreams. I was being driven to the olives until I discovered that my parents were indeed buried on the land of the olives and killed. And then I kept getting more dreams that were taking me back to where I had been involved with Scientology in Davis, California, which is far to the north.
Can I ask you a question, Peter? Because
let me just finish this before you ask.
It has to do with what you're saying.
But listen, just wait.
I read it really well.
Just wait a second. Is that I realized that my experience in Scientology, where I had the full out-of-body experience, was on Olive Drive. So Olive was beating me over the head. So go ahead and ask your question.
It's weird that you even went there, because you caught up on how I was feeling anyway. I had to write it down so I didn't lose that thought when you were talking. And I'm sorry what you went through with your parents. I've lost.
It's fine. It's no problem.
But
it was a gift. It was a gift. It was a gift from Spirit.
No, I agree that those things are certain things that we have to go through, and it's interesting that you've learned that about yourself and are able to look at it that way, and I think that's very important. I'm curious, was it not too long after your parents' funeral where is that where you sort of were searching a little bit more, and that's where you stumbled upon Scientology around that
No,
time?
no. I was already in Scientology when that happened.
Really?
Yeah, and
Really?
that made the
Wow, so you were spiritually searching before you were 21 years old already, huh?
yes. In that and I wrote a book about that because of the Scientology factor. I wrote a whole book about it called Montauk Book of the Dead. It was originally that was the original title of the book, but the Scientology took up like 465 pages or something like that. So I wrote that book, and then I added the Montauk Book of the Living, which is what I wanted to write in the first place. And the reason I wrote the book was to show my background and history of how I got involved with Montauk Project and how I was able to negotiate all of the rocks and shoals or difficulties or challenges that it would normally take one off of the beaten course, because I had a lot of experience with mind control, Scientology being a technique for alleviating mind control, but at the same time, that which can alleviate the control of the mind can also use mind control. So
Yeah.
it's a double-edged sword, and that's why Scientology is by and large viewed today as a mind control organization.
Would you, now that you're looking sort of from the outside in and have had experience within it as well, and then you've of course left it by now, and you're able to move on with your life and have a different perspective maybe by now than you did 20, 30 years ago. Would you look at it as a UFO cult, or would
definitely not a UFO cult. Definitely not a UFO cult. It never was and never will be. In my estimation, it was basically it's a cult, but it had techniques for alleviating post-traumatic stress syndrome. That's what it came out of. But the thing is, when you get into deeper layers of PTSD or post-traumatic stress syndrome, there's a certain point where this life and the experiences in this life become okay. It's like you end up going into earlier traumas or collective traumas on the morphogenetic grid. It's not just about the traumas that you experience. Now, if somebody's been shell-shocked and charged up by having been in a war zone or being suffered satanic ritual abuse, they might be so charged up they might not ever be able to get beyond what happened to them in this life. Then again, they might. But so in other words, but when you go deeper into the collective unconscious, what turns up is stuff. So that's what the organization, the technology or the counseling techniques that they call technology was originally designed to do. And in the merry business of living life, stuff happens. They were cited by conspiracy, the original mother of conspiracy theory, Mae Brussel, who did very good work on the Warren Commission. She took the Warren Report apart, and she was the first conspiracy theorist who is given short shrift in this day and age. But she was cited the Church of Scientology in the 1970s as the only one who was doing anything to expose the Third Reich connections in the U.S. government, the connections to the old Third Reich. And she was very adamant about that. In other words, they had their own intelligence unit, their own intelligence network that was bigger than most countries. It wouldn't be bigger than the CIA necessarily. It might not be as big as the MI6 of Great Britain, but it was bigger than the intelligence network of most countries. And they were basically they helped pioneer the Freedom of Information Act, and they were seeking to expose elements of the government that were corrupt. part of the motivation for that, but not exclusively, was that the government was doing underhanded means to prevent freedom of religion, in spite of whatever misgivings they might have been guilty of.
Yeah,
So
it's funny. It's funny that people they didn't find out really and realize it till later that a lot of the Nazi scientists were working for our government and for NASA and everything. You know, my one of my family members, Lori Bruno, she's 80 now. Lori, I even had her on my show recently. She worked in 1960 for. I think she worked for, I don't know, for over 5 or 6 years, maybe even more. She worked for NASA as a technical illustrator. And it was like right when Werner von Braun, she had to work with him and stuff as well. So she knew, we knew, right? You know, my family and people, certain people knew where not a lot of this knowledge came from back then. It's just people didn't. It's funny how they tend to not mention that part, right?
well, everybody knew Werner von Braun was heading up the rocket program in America. That was no great secret.
Yeah.
The extensiveness of what was going on with Reinhard Gehlen, who was the German in charge of military intelligence in the Russian front. He was the one who headed up the CIA. So there was so much that Mae Brussel was uncovering, and she did it all by doing paper. She hired a paper clipping service of all the people in the Warren Report, and they all had all of these connections, which were German connections that went down to Argentina, to Germany, and the clipping service was telling her a story that she wasn't writing herself. It was the news services were telling her a story by reason of things having been selected for her. So she was on a mission to find things out, and she found that the government was very corrupt, and she did mention the Church of Scientology as her one ally in this effort. She was not a Scientologist, but they were doing their own investigations. But that's just history, and it's not irrelevant to today, but it's not what's taking place today, where Scientology became one of the problems instead of the solution.
Yeah, I understand. I for sure believe though that L. Ron Hubbard had psychic energy about him, and that doesn't mean that he did it and did things appropriately and he took it and he did things right. I'm not in any way condoning him, or did I know him personally, but I had some interesting dreams that incorporated him, and I didn't find out until later on when I was younger, until I saw a picture of what he looked like. That actually it was like hit the face I saw in my dream when I was younger. So I had some. I think I had some sort of my own little spiritual omen signs warning me. I think not to get caught up in it, because later on in life I did have the opportunity to meet some people, and I probably would have went the other way if I didn't have these sort of like psychic premonition dreams. It's interesting. I had a vision of him one time, Peter, and I didn't know it was him until later on, and I saw a picture, and it had to do with, I saw something about Dianetics when I was in life, and then that was the first time I ever saw a picture of what he looked like, and had these chills come over me. Oh my God, that was the guy in my dream. I had a dream of this guy. He was like on his deathbed, and he was surrounded by like friends and family, and his head and his body was like pulsating angry red, like just red, and he was screaming at everybody that as soon as he died that he wanted everybody to burn his body and burn him right away, and screaming. And it was like such a surreal dream where I would feel like I would wake up and I was like sweating, and like it was real, and you don't even realize that you're like that it wasn't like a dream at first. You're like, whoa. It's sort of like one of those dreams where it wakes you up out of the dream, that it was so intense, and you sort of like retain a couple of seconds of it, I didn't know until like 10 years later that guy in the dream on the bed was L. Ron Hubbard, weird stuff. Like, so I definitely had some sort of like psychic premonition about him for some reason.
Well, he had a lot of psychic energy for sure. I experienced it directly, but more, perhaps more relevant than that is that he comes as what my research has shown, and much of it is based upon not only having been a witness to him, and of course his magical partner Marjorie Cameron, who I believe came from the same genetic pool, because they both were born in Iowa, and their both parents' name were Wilsons. They're
Interesting.
both,
She's got the red hair bloodline too.
oh yeah, they look alike, and it is my contention is that their DNA is of a messianic lineage. And when I say messianic lineage, a lineage is a tradition. It's a family tradition that the DNA would exemplify or embody. Now, if you study the Kabbalah, everyone's DNA is similar to the degree. Well, I should start by saying is that the Kabbalah is a map of DNA.
We're about to go to break too in about 30 seconds too. So just to let you know.
We'll pick up with that. It's an archetypal map of DNA and how life evolves. So we can get back to that, and we will start up where how that fits into L. Ron Hubbard's personal genetics.
I would love to do that. Everybody don't go anywhere. Mr. Peter Moon is in the house. We'll be right back after this as we spiral out.
You're listening to the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
No hate, no hype, no fear.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are here inside the Eye of Ra on the Truth Frequency Radio Network. It is a cold night here on the Hudson River here, looking out on the Hudson here in New York. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in, whether you're listening to us on iHeartRadio or on Truth Frequency Radio Network or paranormal radio apps out there. Check us out at tfrlive.com to support us in the chat room. I know many of you out there are just listening and not joining in on the chat, but you could definitely join us in on the chat, and you could find our amazing guest tonight at timetraveleducationcenter.com. Of course, you can find Peter Moon's books on Amazon and all over the world. So definitely pick up his Montauk series of books, and you can put questions in the chat room. If I get a chance to ask throughout the show, I'll definitely pop them in if they're relevant to what's going on. Peter, thank you for joining me. I definitely got an interesting question to talk about what we're talking about, but if you wanted to continue what you were talking about first, I can add it in later. But it's pretty relevant to like L. Ron Hubbard and everything else. But I didn't want to
go ahead, and then we'll pick up. Go ahead, ask the question.
Well, you had personal experience even with the man, right? Like, so you were working. So I'm interested in your opinion, definitely more than some of the other people I've talked about before. And I do find, it all interesting, the topic, because I never met him before. But, people tend to get caught up in some of the glamorous stuff about certain information they
The
hear.
glamour or the
You know?
scandal.
Yeah, right. So, but many people really don't look at or understand, and I know from personal experience as well, the intricate details that make it all very so, and that you need, that's important for people to understand and discover, like where certain psychic energy and certain things about people generate from. And like you like even referenced, a lot of times, and unfortunately rarely do we ever see somebody born and continue throughout their whole life to have a full connection to their higher self, or a complete higher dimensional connection or psychic channel. A lot of times, unfortunately, it's brought out through trauma or some sort of near death experience, or some sort of suppressed emotions, or some sort of hysteric state or something, and that sort of like triggers that psychic energy. Unfortunately, that's a lot of times how it is generated. And I think with maybe it sort of activates some of our inactive neurons and some of our inactive DNA. I think that's, both of those are related, and maybe that's what happens, sort of. But from your opinion, do you consider L. Ron Hubbard to be in the case as this? Do you think some of his psychic energy originally came from suppressed emotions? Because I know people, that's why I think sometimes people got to understand that some of the information we're hearing, you got to sort of look at it with a grain of salt even sometimes, because the people that are generating that info might not be grounded individuals. Like say for instance, before I pass it over to you, say for instance Ingo Swann, right? A lot of people look at his information that it has to be 100% correct. But what if this guy had like suppressed emotions about his sexual orientation, and that would lead to his psychic energy to not be in a grounded state, so he would have distortions in that psychic information. So that to me is, if somebody's psychic energy is generating because, and they maybe have suppressed sexual desires or suppressed feelings about themselves, I would consider them not in a grounded state to have a clean instrument, and they would have distorted information come up in their psychic channel, right? So I'm interested to find your I'm interested in finding your opinion about L. Ron Hubbard.
Was this somebody else's question, or is it your question? Because it sounds like you're asking me the question, but was that it sounded like you were going to the chat room for a question. So I want to
No, that's from me for 100%. That's from me.
That wasn't from the chat room.
No.
Okay. Well, my answer was going to address that. So the question's fine. Of course, one thing is, I was saying is that to recap where we left off at the break, is that the Kabbalah, or the Kabbalistic tree of life, or the tarot cards for that matter, which are all effort to describe the mechanism of how life evolves. And they are a metaphorical representation of DNA and how DNA evolves through life, not just through the human form, but through all life. And I would agree. Certain parts of that DNA everything is self-reflective. Like one Sephiroth or sphere contains all of the other Sephiroth or sphere. In other words, all of the other archetypes. The situation is, with any piece of DNA or individual, some people accentuate different archetypes more than others, but they have all of them. For example, a beautiful woman might exhibit more Venus, where a more wise-looking crone might exhibit more of Athena or Minerva, the goddess of wisdom. Yeah. Some men are more martial or athletic, which is Mars. Some are more regal or Jovian, which is Jupiter, so on and so forth. The messianic aspect is Tiparet, or Tippereth, as people would more anglicize it. But that is the messianic core.
So we would basically be living in the messianic era right now, right?
Well, that's a separate thing. But Hubbard is, in his DNA, of his family's DNA, that the Wilson Cameron lineage. which is also what Duncan Cameron, the Montauk Project. This is how.
Wait. Oh wow. I never knew that.
Yeah, there is and he was trained to be the Christ and the Antichrist in Montauk. So there is this aspect. Now, the problem with DNA, particularly when you're talking with a rarefied aspect of it, it's not exact. It's not precise. So it's kind of like
Code.
and I don't mean this pejoratively to Hubbard or to anybody, but it's like, imagine if you had a football quarterback who could do everything on the field better than anybody else, but he was retarded.
You like making those sports references.
Yeah, but he's retarded, and so it's like he's misfiring all the time.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that Hubbard was retarded, but what I'm saying is that many of his family members are what you would call riding the cusp of where things get very hairy. Things get very hairy, so that you have, when you get around magical people, you can find that they have very precise knowledge, but it's often surrounded by things that are not palatable.
Who was his son's mother? The one I've seen interviews with his son before. The one with the red that had the reddish hair as well. That was, I forget what the guy's name is.
L. Ron Hubbard Jr.
Yeah. What was his?
Ron DeWolf.
Oh wow.
Well, the DeWolf name, and but it goes back to the assistant for the Rabbi Lowe, who was the one who.
Oh yeah. Wow, I know that name. Yeah.
The one who created the golem. So I believe that that Hubbard's lineage not only comes from people who were involved with the Golem of Prague on his mother's side, but on his father's side, from the lineage of Amran. The name Cameron comes from Amran, where the CH is silent in Hebrew. And Amran was Ammon in the Bible or the Quran. Mary, the mother of Jesus, comes from the family of Ammon. And this is where we get the name, the tribe of Benjamin, Ben Ammon, where the J is silent. These are some of the things I've discovered in my adventures. So that is a lineage of the Christ, at least in metaphor, if not literally. And it's a messianic lineage, which believes in it. And according to one Celtic shaman who was of this lineage and who helped introduce me to the idea from a different perspective, and she looked very much like a cross between, in many respects, like L. Ron Hubbard's daughter and Marjorie Cameron, because she had the reddish, blondish hair, and she just oozed that sort of energy. And she said that her family was very gifted. They had this messianic lineage, but they were screwed up by their sexuality. They would often dive off the deep end. So when you're bringing up Ingo Swann had his moment in the sun when he worked for the Stanford Research Institute, and he was able to influence a magnetometer from a distance, scientifically verified. So he was heralded as a great psychic. He was a psychic. He was a Scientologist. And he eventually wheedled his way out of that and ended up involved with the Ordo Templi Orientis, which was the successor of Aleister Crowley's organization.
Yeah, people tend to not mention that he was influenced on Scientology much. You know, they tend to not, but he was influenced by L. Ron Hubbard, wasn't he, at the beginning of
deeply, and he revered him. But of course, but the problem with somebody like that who has he became a full-fledged homosexual later in his life. I can't speak for him earlier. He did not have that reputation in Scientology for sure. But what happens?
I think he kept it hidden for a while.
Yeah.
You know.
But what happens?
Yeah, you're from the New York area like me, so I knew of him as he lived on the Bowery for many years, and he was sort of like a local legend, an artist in the area. But he had like a lot of art that I saw from him over the years was like very homoerotic. I wasn't really into it either.
The important point is that the human being, when he's in a body is going to have certain urges, needs, just
Yeah,
like
of course.
he needs
Of course.
to eat. He's going to want to have some form of sexuality.
Doesn't make him a bad person. What the part I was
let me
pointing
finish
out
what I'm
was that
saying.
when you have
Let me
suppressed,
finish what I'm saying. Is
Yeah.
if he's got sexual drives and he cannot sublimate them, he's going to be taken down into the netherworld.
Yeah.
And so whatever psychic energy you have is subject to being taken down
exactly.
into the netherworld. And I can't speak for him, but certainly, if that addresses your question of who Hubbard is, he's a complex character. Part of him was messianic, and part of him was off. And whether it's 90% on and 10% off, or 50-50, or the other way around, people are going to have their own personal experiences and resonances, and they're going to have their own judgments and opinion, none of which are particularly productive. However, there is a ratio. So you want to learn from the intelligent messianic aspect, and you want to reject the non-intelligent or non-messianic aspect of anyone who's teaching you.
Well, so like from your opinion, from what you know, you would say that at the heart of it, he was really like a messianic Kabbalist.
Well, I wouldn't call him a Kabbalist because he was aware of it, but he was not a Kabbalist. He formed his own system, which was his whole. He put his mind out in volumes of literature and charts and stuff like this. He put his mind out there.
I wonder if he was influenced by like Lithuanian Kabbalah, like the Vilna Gaon.
I can't tell you, and I don't think he was very extremely well studied in the subject.
Yeah.
Not at all. He was versed. He had some experience with it, and he was not stupid, but he was not like a master scholar on it by any means. But he didn't need to be, because
but he had messianic ideas.
Well, definitely, he had a messianic complex,
Yeah.
and he was able to deliver a lot to a certain amount of people. I was very fortunate to get the cream of what he had to deliver as far as I was concerned, and beyond that, it's. But yeah, he was gifted, and there were a lot of people that he was able to command a lot of people's attention and lives, but each individual has their own trip and their own individual experiences. Mine just happened to coincide with his path, which worked out for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, it doesn't mean people can't have a bad experiences. I mean, good experiences with it all. It seems to have positive effects on your life in many ways, and other people's. I think it's just you can't look at other people like they have all the answers for your life, or somebody's system has all the answers for your life, but some people it actually had some positive experiences with certain things, but I do consider it like a very cult aspect. But what was the whole idea of the UFO part of it all, and the alien world part of it all? Because I never really looked into that aspect of it. Was there some sort of connection with UFOs or something with L. Ron Hubbard? Well,
I will say this. I will say two UFO stories from when I was on his ship twice. In 1972, I arrived on the ship, and I was being shown around the ship by somebody who was assigned to me as a buddy to orient me and stuff. So he gave me a tour around the ship and helped me with questions and stuff. And I asked him, I said, when you're at sea, do you ever see any UFOs or anything like that? And he says, only once do I, and he said that the ship was at sea, and somebody on the bridge saw what amounted to be what he determined to be a UFO.
Wait, you used to go out on a boat with him?
L. Ron Hubbard was on a ship. He was on a ship from 1967 through 1975, predominantly on a ship. He lived on a ship. It was called the Apollo, and it initially cruised the Mediterranean. When I got aboard,
Wow.
it
Nice.
spent its time in Portugal and Morocco. And then eventually in 1974, it crossed the Atlantic to the Caribbean.
Nice.
I joined it in the Caribbean in 75.
That is a cool little trip. Yeah.
Well, it was very interesting, and it was an adventure to say the least. But so
How old were you at this time?
I arrived on the ship when I was 19.
Wow.
Was a legal adult. They had changed the law in California to where you were a legal adult at 18.
Wait, so you were on board when everything happened with your parents?
No. I came back to LA when that happened. It's a long, involved story, but it's so that was prior to my parents' death. But in 1972, was it like just a random accident, or was there like a lot more to that story? It was a drunk who went into
oh my God.
And did a head-on collider.
Oh, that's horrible to hear. I'm so sorry.
You don't have to be sorry. It's history, and it's not something that I certainly had never wallowed in. It was a fate accompli that was meant to be, for lack of anyway. It was a pivotal experience in my life, and it turned out to be very transmutative for myself. But however, that's what my Montauk Book of the Dead is about, and you can read all about it in there if you have the time and inclination. But to get back to the UFO thing you asked about, is that I said, do you ever see UFOs out here? He says, only once. And Hubbard was on the bridge, and somebody pointed out to him, hey, did you see that flying saucer over there, sir? And he goes, he says without any hesitation, according to the way it was reported to me, he goes, flying them quite badly, aren't they? Like, wow. He did not miss a trick. Like they're flying them like a bunch of incompetents, and that is who L. Ron Hubbard was. He was quick, he was sharp, and he would not have been overly impressed if a flying saucer came into his ethereal space, as opposed to most people who might sit down and listen to the message, or what great thing do you have to tell us, oh great master. That was not Hubbard. He was very much somebody who was in tune with his own holy guardian angel, which is a magical term known as the HGA in occult circles, particularly magical occult circles associated with Aleister Crowley. He was totally in alignment with what you call the higher self. So in any case, the other one was, I remember.
I would have thought he had more interaction with some than that, than just a glimpse on the boat one time, on the ship one time. I would have thought that he had some interdimensional connections.
I can address that, but as far as a UFO cult, no. When I remember going aboard.
If he ever met that app, not to cut you off, I'm sorry, but I don't want to lose. I just wanted to throw it in there real quick because it popped in my head. And welcome to everybody that's now joining in the chat. I think we are the first live show tonight, so now everybody's starting to join. Do you know if he ever met or have influenced that? What was that guy's name? Applewhite. That what was it? The Heaven's Gate guy.
I'm sure he had no contact with him whatsoever.
Yeah, they didn't. See, that was another guy that had like a lot of sexual, repressed, homophobic energy.
That's that's like mixing Richard Nixon with Joe Biden. They just, it's too far apart.
No, I was just wondering if they ever had met before or ever knew each other.
Not to my knowledge, and I wouldn't imagine why, because but in any case, the second time when I went back to the ship in 1975, I asked. There was only one person that had ever mentioned a UFO or anything. It just wasn't something that was talked about or discussed. I mean, it might be mentioned, but there was certainly no preoccupation with UFOs. Where I think what you're alluding to is what comes into is in L. Ron Hubbard's phenomena of what would come up in counseling sessions, where people would routinely and certainly at his suggestion of some of the information he had written, that people across millennia who had not just lives on this planet, but an infinitude of lives beyond this planet where they had experiences with alien civilizations. He did believe he had experiences with alien civilizations, but it was not a cult in the sense that it was a belief. The only time
it wasn't incorporated in any levels. Like eventually, you'll get picked up by the UFO at one level.
No.
See, that's a common myth. You know that. That's a common myth.
Let me explain. What would happen inevitably in counseling sessions is that people, and I counseled many people on these themselves, where they would, to relieve a pain sensation or emotion or physical problem in the body, they would address an experience that went back into a situation in their mind where they were dealing with an alien or off-planet situation where they were being subjected to pain, torture, unconsciousness, or something that was against their will. And people would routinely go back into their counseling sessions and relieve trauma that we would now call PTSD by going back and vicariously experiencing the time when you were being laser zapped in the throat by an alien reptoid or something. I'm just making that up. But you're going back, and when you feel the sensation of the laser or whatever implement was being used on you, and you go through it enough times, you dissipate it and it relieves. And then all of a sudden you're better. And the true test of it is, does it ever bother you again? And if the answer is no, you say, ding, 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 touchdown, game over. And you're happy. It does not matter what the experience was, whether that alien civilization even existed. Now, he would sometimes go off and talk about ancient civilizations, and basically his opinion, based upon his own personal gnosis, was that this civilization that we live in on Earth in this last century, was when he lived, was a lower D-grade harmonic mockery of past civilizations. So if he would say if he would see street lights, he'd say this design is a knockoff of an old civilization. He'd see the automobiles. This is a knockoff of an old civilization. He never got to meet my ex-wife, but he would have very much liked her because she was so creative, and he would have loved creativity. So when you see so much of what's offered, and the world is a lot more creative now than it was back in the 1950s, where so much of, now you have designer this and designer that. So much of what was in the culture that time was low-grade knockoffs. And he equated this to people just repeating what was in their mind. When you talk about the upper levels of Scientology, which is so infamous for being associated with a character called Xenu, who there was a character of a similar name in a comic book of that time period. All of this was an attempt to describe mass implantation of the human race, which was a result of overpopulation.
We're going to break. Pick up there. Don't go anywhere. Everybody, we'll be right back after this.
I try and hold the sun. I try and hold the sun.
Truth Frequency Radio is your number one.
This is the Truth Frequency Radio Network. We are TFR. Truth Frequency Radio.
Thank you for sticking around. My name is Ra Castaldo, and this is the Truth Frequency Radio Network. And the one and only Peter Moon is in the house. Thank you for joining us, everybody. You can find Peter at timetraveleducationcenter.com, and you can pick his book up on Amazon, and I'm sure at his website. And he also has interesting information on his website. I was checking it out earlier, and it's always an interesting topic. I definitely would like to have you on more often than every 4 years. Peter, for sure. It's a shame. It's a shame. And you make a lot of interesting Facebook posts. I always see what you're posting, and you always have a very, very interesting information to share. Let's pick it up right where we left off, for sure. It's interesting too. Like, I wonder. You had a Facebook post now that I mention it, a couple of weeks ago, talking about how the way Stanton Friedman used to wear his eyebrows, right? Right. That I found that very interesting. I pointed it out a lot of times as well, and I always referenced it to Michael Aquino as well. Sometimes I would say it's very similar to how this guy wears it, and did he ever? I wonder if he was ever influenced by Scientology or anything like that. Or if he. But you had made a reference that he was possibly influenced by Satanism.
Oh, definitely.
And I found that very interesting. I would like to hear more if you'd like to talk about that for a moment too.
We could, but we're digressing from the subject we were on.
Yeah, you're right.
And if you want me to, complete that thread, I will. What I will, and then we'll go.
Yeah,
on.
let's get to it later.
Basically, what I was talking is that Scientology, Hubbard was trying to address a situation in the collective unconsciousness through his own vision, but of course, when it gets caricaturized into the vulgar format, it's like there was this evil Lord Xenu who was trying to implant the human race in these very, sort of satirical scenarios. But how that evolved was through this incident was coming up in the collective unconsciousness of several Scientologists. Their auditing sessions in the 1960s, in the early 1960s. And this was told to me by one of my friends years after he told me this. It kept coming up. And then Hubbard, of course, who was privy to it.
He implemented it?
Well, also saw it according to his own counseling sessions. This guy went in and what he called audited his own time track. Audit means to listen to or counsel and process his own time track every single day. He would go in and use Scientology processing, and which include subjective examination of not only one's own mind, but other minds. And this is what he came up with. And this was proven to be a very powerful level in the 1960s, but there was a lot of misunderstanding about it as time would tell, and that's a whole nother story. But one could, to answer your question about a UFO cult, it's really not accurate to describe it as a UFO cult.
No, I was asking. I wasn't saying I was describing it either.
People do. Or a science fiction cult might be more appropriate, but in any case, the average Scientologist does, at least when I got involved, I didn't learn of any of this until I'd been involved for like 9 years, and when I encountered it, it was nothing more than a prop to which to address things in my own mind. It was not something I was inclined or forced to accept as truth in the sense that, that you went to school and had a birth certificate and all this sort of thing. It's not the same type. It's sort of a prop to stimulate things in your own mind to address what is bothering you, not as and so it gets very distorted, and people are very quick to distort and say, oh, look at that, look at that, look at that, look at that, because they have confusions in their own mind and they weren't able to use whatever he offered to reconcile what was in their own mind, and became a slave to whatever the hell they were doing.
No, I very much believe and know from my own life experiences that things exist out there. It's just understanding what that you're communicating with. Is a part of your higher self? Is it part of a distortion of who you are, or is it some sort of higher force, or what it is? Do you know, or were you ever told, or from your own experiences, maybe, I'm not sure, were you like, did you find out what they were communicating with it? Like, was it like similar to what other people have experienced? Like, you had some other people that experienced things similar to what we would call UFOs or otherworldly beings as rebellious fallen angels or something. Other people would look at it like they're extraterrestrials, or some people have experienced like a Council of Nine or something like that. Have you ever been told or experienced what they were communicating with, or a description of it in any way?
Who's they?
The people that were having these collective experiences with otherworldly.
Those I might clarify. Those happened before I got involved. So I was being offered the fruits of their experience.
Did you get? Did you get any details about it?
Communicated by Hubbard. What?
Did you get any details about it, though?
No. In fact, the way counseling proceeded in Scientology, you were never interested in details or information. This is a big contrast between what went on with the Montauk deprogramming and Scientology. In Montauk deprogramming, they're always trying to get information. In Scientology counseling, you're trying to better the emotional tone of the individual. You're trying to get the individual to improve. You're not there getting information or getting secrets. The only secrets that you're getting at are your own secrets. What is making you feel like this? What is holding you back from living your own dreams? What is holding you back? So it's the goal was never to get information or to seek the conspiracy of the Council of Nine or any of this stuff. It was just to improve yourself. And if one deviated from that, one was on a wrong course.
Did you have to sever your ties with your family when you joined?
Absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not. In fact, I learned very early on that Hubbard's wife, Mary Sue, had written a policy letter telling you not to, and even commenting that Scientologists would sometimes, people that got into Scientology were divorcing themselves from the outer world because they didn't like the outer world. So they would sometimes use that as an excuse to isolate themselves from their family. She said, don't do this. This is a big no-no. Now, at the same time, what you have today is you have a policy where they do make you disconnect from your family. That is not what we did. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Now
you got out before it got bad.
And that doesn't mean that there weren't problems between families and Scientologists. There were, and sometimes the Scientologists would handle them myopically and stupidly, but that was not how they were supposed to be handled. You were supposed to maintain decent relations with your family and friendly relations. Sometimes, however, family members will become obtrusively obnoxious and controlling of the member who's in Scientology or in any such activity. So that would become a cumbersome problem for the individual to deal with when the family member is overly controlling or obtrusive, whether it's for the betterment of the individual or not. In today's world, it would be for the betterment of the individual.
If you don't mind me asking, I'm just curious. You don't have to go into the details if you're not comfortable. But say if somebody, I'm just interested in, because I'm curious. But say if somebody, when they join Scientology and they're, say, on the ship with them for a certain amount of time, how does it work financially? Do you have to like purchase your way on there, or there's
no. There's different levels of Scientology. There was the public people who would basically pay for their counseling or their training, where they might learn how to counsel other peoples. I joined the Sea Organization, which was the hardcore Scientologists who sort of gave up their secular life to live and work for Scientology. And that's what I did for 11 years. So you don't, you're there, your basic needs are taken care of. And that's who was on the ship. You had to be a member of the Sea Organization to be on the ship. And even then, you had to be selected. It was not for everybody. You had to meet certain qualifications and whatnot. Later on, towards the very end, they did accept people who wanted to pay money, not to be on the ship, but to be counseled. And they moved that operation to Clearwater, Florida, where it became a thriving operation in terms of financial remuneration for the church for giving counseling services. But it was only for people who had made a certain amount of dedicated their entire lives to Scientology and to the purposes of L. Ron Hubbard.
Wow. So when was the first time you ran into information about Montauk? Was it through Scientology, or was it way after?
No, that was after I had left Scientology. I was in Long Island for 7 years. I had lived on Long Island for 7 years and had basically was now in a business with my ex-wife, which was very successful, and it was an advertising business. And I was, I would seek out new clients and whatnot by going to business meetings and whatnot. And from there, I ended up in metaphysical circles. And I was directed to a lecture by Preston Nichols. And not because he was involved with Montauk, but because he was an inventor. And
Psychotronics.
Yes, and I was told he needed help marketing his devices. And so I went to meet him, and I was subjected to a talk by him and several other people, and I got interested in Montauk. And of course, that's kind of how the book came into being. And of course, all of my pre-qualifications in Scientology enabled me to deal with him in stride. It was not, I was able to understand who he was and what he was doing, his pitfalls and his positives, and basically do his book. I could not possibly have done it had I not had the experience in dealing with other people in Scientology. It just wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have happened.
That's one of the classics now. I mean, it's been what, 25 years or so?
It's been 30 years. It's
30 years. Wow.
30 years since I met him. The book is now, it was published in 1992. So it's over 28 years old. The copyright is now renewed.
I know. I first got it in like about 1996, I think it was. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, it's a classic now, one of the classics. You know, my wife knew Preston. I never met him in person because I just had no desire. But I knew Duncan, and Duncan was trying to take me up there for a while, where he lived up in Cairo. You know, yeah, of course, there's positive and negative about a lot of people, and you know, certain things can be used, certain knowledge can be used for the good of humanity, and certain knowledge can be used for control and domination and destruction. So people make their own choices in life. But yeah, that area of Montauk, like I previously mentioned at the beginning of the show, I do feel that's part of a very ancient power spot on our harmonic energy grid. And right now, I think that there's sort of crystal technology that's even deep beneath the sea, embedded within beneath the waters and within our planet. that's sort of awakening as the quantum technology of our science is accumulating. And I think it's interesting you talk about Kabbalah, because I believe that a lot of the Kabbalistic belief system and workings is tied right into this quantum shift that's happening with our our multiverse. And I think that that place is a very interesting spot. You talk about in your book, Montauk Book of the Living, the pyramid that was out there, the pyramids of Montauk. And what's interesting, Peter, I'm not going to say the exact location right now, but where I am in the Hudson Valley, they don't let you go in the spot right now. They took it off because there's this historic area. It's a historic area where, where Anthony Wayne and his troops and different battles took place. They don't let you over there. But I know a spot where there's these two mini pyramids that's covered by shrubbery, and it's they don't let you go in there no more in that area. But it's right on the sort of Hudson River shore, basically, too. And not far from Indian Point, even, where the nuclear power plant is. And it's very interesting that you talk about those pyramids, because I do think there's a power spot beneath there somewhere as well. That's probably got some ancient technology or ancient historic stuff down there, crystal records, maybe even, who knows. But how much information did you find out about that area? Was there pyramids for like periods of time, and then you said you reported it was a hurricane that demolished it finally in the Montauk area?
Well, this is what a friend of mine had told me, who was taken out there to see the pyramids when he was a kid. I mean, this was in the 30s. He was a young boy in the 30s.
What were they made out of?
Well, he just said he was taken out there to see pyramids. I mean, one of the Native Americans.
But were they stone structures, or?
Well, if you let me answer the question, I'll try and answer it. The Gale Evening Star, her grandfather used to talk about the pyramids, and they were structures out there where they had an underground in them where you would go down and they would do ceremony and stuff in them. By the pictures, they appear to be covered with sand to a certain extent. They would be probably constructed somewhat similar to a teepee. Whether they were made out of mud or whatnot, I don't know, but they were structures that were probably packed with mud. But I really don't know, because we don't have much information. There are different versions and different stories. What is important is that they recognized it as a sacred spot, and that sacred spot was used to basically manipulate time by later day characters.
Yeah, that's interesting that the military, of course, knew to put their base right on that spot. It's I bet you that there's something awakening right in those energy spots right now. And all throughout that area and down the whole Mid-Atlantic ridge. Even Edgar Cayce talked about it in some of his readings. And of course you can hold all those with a grain of salt. People can't say that he got 100% right as well, because he was going unconscious and having something embody him, basically, and he would wake up and not know what the hell happened.
I think the most important thing to offer you at this point would be to read the book, because it's been 4 years since we talked. Inside the Earth. The Second Tunnel by Radu Cinemar, because that goes into a description of what's inside the Earth. And 2 books later is the etheric crystal. But that book, The Inside the Earth, goes into a scientific description of what's inside the Earth and the inner Earth. And it's very enlightening, because it starts off with science, and then it goes into contacts he makes with civilizations beneath the Earth, which are in startling contrast to whatever was going on at the Montauk Project, or similar stories you read about under Dulce and these sort of things, where you have, monstrosities happening. Inside the Earth is one of the most interesting books I've ever read. in terms of, I mean, I've read it several times because I edited it.
Does it have any similarities with some of the parts that you read, like in The Coming Race, that book, The Coming Race?
It's far beyond that, because it answers so much, and it far exceeds.
Who is this mysterious Radu man that you met? How did you come into the meeting this man? And can you explain him a little bit more for everybody out there?
Radu Cinemar came into my life when I was there was a publisher. Well, he was an editor in Romania who was assigned the task of reading the Montauk Project in the English, and saying his boss came to him and said, "Would you read this book and see if we should publish it? Give me your opinion." He reads the book in English and says, "Yes, we should publish it." His publisher says, "No, I don't want to publish it." So he goes off and starts his own publishing company, which has been very successful ever since. He published the book in Romanian, and it started his whole company. One of the individuals who read it was working in Romanian intelligence and says, "I have a book. Would you like to read my book and perhaps publish it?" And this book, I've since published it in Transylvania. I mean, I call it Transylvanian Sunrise, which is not the name of the book in Romanian. But that book was written by Radu Cinemar, who was personally selected by the head of an intelligence department called Department Zero in Romania. In other words, it's zero because nobody's supposed to know about it. It may not be its actual name, but it's certainly its pragmatic identification. Radu Cinemar wrote the book. It was published in Romanian. It was sent to me in English, was translated into English so I could read it. It took me 4 years before I decided to publish it because I didn't have time to read it. And then as soon as I agreed to publish it, I was taken to Romania by Dr. David Anderson, a time travel scientist. And so Radu was somebody who I was never able to meet him. He did send me a CD, and he corresponded with me frequently for several years. Now I'm lucky to hear from him once a year, and it's usually when he issues a new book. He'll give me a friendly word here and there. He's very mysterious. He's had incredible experiences which have lasted over a period of 17 years now, and where he's been allowed to visit a chamber beneath the Romanian Sphinx, and now he's one of the people who has routine access to it. So it's a whole story. And we've talked about in the past, but the fifth book that he wrote was Inside the Earth, and it was after a lag of many years from his previous book. In the meantime, I've gotten all involved in Romania myself. I have been there 11 times. I was able to meet by complete happenstance on one of my astrological lines at the holy site of Sarmisegetuza, a woman who would become my wife, Romanian wife. She just got her citizenship this month.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, we've been married 6 years. So I'm very tied into Romania now. And it's and the many adventures I've had there in the last few years. And
I know a kickboxer from there really well.
Okay.
Yeah.
We did have
interesting culture.
Yeah, we did have a kickboxer who used to lecture at when I go to Romania, and Dr. David Anderson was also a kickboxer. He was a time travel scientist who had an extensive experience in kickboxing competitively.
Yeah, his name's Adabui.
I mean, I don't follow kickboxing, so I don't know, but
no, that's a very interesting culture. No, congratulations that you guys got that. You know, yeah, I remember you said that you married her last time when we first met years back. Yeah, it's awesome.
So you want to go into Stanton Friedman now?
Yeah, I mean we got like a minute till break, and then we got the last 25 minutes after the break. Yeah, we could do that. We're about to go to break, so I don't want to get too started. But until we go to break, we'll pick it up right after break. Your website is
Skybooks.usa.com to buy
for
books.
the book, Skybooks. Yeah.
Skybooks.usa.com and the Time Travel Education Center.
So everybody check that out during a commercial break if you want. That is Skybooks, and also Time Travel Education Center, Mr. Peter Moon, and he is the original author of Montauk Project, Experiments in Time, Montauk Book of the Dead, Montauk Book of the Living, and so much more. So don't go anywhere. Definitely support Peter. We'll be right back after the break as we spiral out.
No hate, no hype, no fear. We are DFR, your protection from deception.
Welcome back, everybody. It's the last segment. Thank you for sticking around. We got the one and only Mr. Peter Moon in the house. You can find Peter at timetraveleducationcenter.com, and you can find him at Skybooks to get his amazing books. Definitely pick that up to support Peter, everybody. And yeah, let's get into the stand of freedom, because I also have another question probably that sort of flows into it afterwards as well. But yeah, when you brought that up, it's funny that many people don't point out that point about him. But yeah, he would wear his eyebrows in a very peculiar satanic way, even, like almost that Dracula sort of like almost a twist to it. And that was interesting. And maybe over your time, did you ever bump into him? Did you know him personally?
I met him twice.
Yeah.
But he was that waxing of the eyebrows is called the cult of the horned brow, and he really made his reputation as the father of Roswell. But his earlier history is very interesting, because he was a nuclear physicist who worked for General Electric's Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department. And at that time he worked for them, it was a much bigger budget, but they had a publicized $100 million Air Force contract employing 3,400 employees to develop nuclear aircraft. He worked on a black budget scam, which was so-called nuclear flight. They converted a bomber that was purposely fitted with a leaky nuclear reactor that flew all over the United States, irradiating the United States. The pilots were older pilots. They were shielded with thick lead in the cockpit. They didn't want younger pilots to become sterile as a result. The older pilots, it didn't matter. The program irradiated so much of America that, because it was traveling at a very low flight path, that Stanton Friedman was literally frightened to the point of leaving the country. And part of this was the result of his child was mentally disabled from exposure to this radiation.
Really?
So he got Canadian citizenship and he moved to Canada, and where the child could be maintained on a free welfare medical system.
Wow,
Now,
I didn't know that.
Now, this is who he was. Now, when Roswell, and this is part of the new book that I'm in the midst of proofreading right now.
Yeah, you have two new books out, right? One with you and one with Radu.
Well, I have a few new books in the last couple of years. I have the L. Ron Hubbard book called L. Ron Hubbard, The Tao of Insanity, which was published a year ago. And
Great
then I
title.
also, yes, and I published a book by Radu Cinemar, which is called The Etheric Crystal, The Third Tunnel. So those
Even
came
better
out.
title.
Yeah, they came out last year. The new book that I'm about to publish in the spring is called The Roswell Deception and Demystification of World War II by Douglas Dietrich with Peter Moon. And so this is about debunking so much of what happened at Roswell. Now, what happened at Roswell is the Army first announced a press release saying it was a flying disc, followed up by a newspaper report calling it a flying saucer. The Army retracts it almost immediately, saying it was a weather balloon. And this was calculated to make people think it was aliens. This goes back to 1942, February, when the Japanese assaulted Los Angeles, the Los Angeles skies.
Battle of Los Angeles, right?
With air balloons, yes.
Yeah.
Which goes into detail in this book. But the Japanese had perfected air balloons and biological warfare because the United States was menacing and threatening with biological warfare that was done going back to World War I.
So all those stories of little bodies in Roswell, that's totally wrong?
They're 4-foot tall Yakuza, the criminal cult of Japan, who also cut off their pinky finger as an act of atonement. So you had three
Wow.
Asians.
Were they eunuchs?
No.
Oh.
No, they were small and they were trained and they were very loyal.
Because that would explain for them not having no body parts, maybe no genitals and stuff, maybe. You know?
No, they did. They had genitals. Those reports aren't accurate. They had shaven eyebrow. They shaved all their eyebrows because they had to keep themselves. These dirigibles were hydrogen. They were highly flammable because the U.S. had a monopoly on helium, so they used hydrogen, which had a much better lift to it, but it was much more flammable. And they self-immolated. Rather, they were prisoners of war, and they were being manipulated. That's a whole deep story, which we can't go into in this short time. But the Roswell story was kept under wraps.
Interesting. Very interesting. Guys, pick up that book for sure.
From 1947 until about 1979, when a cook, Sergeant Brown, I don't remember his first name, but I'll dig it up here in a second. Brown was, when the moon landing, it was 1969, Sergeant Melvin Brown, when the moon landing happened in 1969 and he saw men going to the moon, he got all excited and he began to talk to his family about that he actually saw bodies, he saw this. His daughter described him as seeing Oriental, and that they were different colors, but they actually turned gray because of rigor mortis. So anyway, Stanton Friedman, well, what happened in 1969, they had to call Michael Aquino back from Vietnam because he was an expert in psyops, and they asked him to take care of, containing what this guy is starting to talk about Roswell. So he then got Stanton Friedman to start working on Roswell. And that's basically, Stanton Friedman became famous for working on talking about Roswell and telling the story of crashes and aliens. And people have really...
Wait, he was friends with Michael Aquino?
Yeah, he worked for Michael Aquino. Yes.
Get out of here.
But Michael Aquino had everybody under his influence in one. He was very influential. It's like...
yeah, we didn't like each other.
Yeah, but
we knew each other. We knew each other, but we didn't like each other.
Yeah. I mean, Michael Aquino's contacts were ubiquitous in radio, and Art Bell and all that. So they had all of this nonsense in the 90s about Art's parts had gotten.
Yeah, no, I didn't know him through radio. It was through other.
I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about Michael Aquino. I'm talking about Michael Aquino had extensive influences of the media.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And for those who don't know, he was the Satanist founder of the Temple of Set, and he was the deputy director of the National Security Agency, which was formed after the Roswell incident. So it was basically a lot of Japanese, very sophisticated dirigibles that wreaked havoc on America and had enough biological weapons to destroy America. And that was why, and people don't realize it, but war with America and Japan was not ended until until a peace treaty of San Francisco was signed in 1951, September, went into effect on the emperor's birthday on 28th April, 1952. So the U.S. was at war through 1952. Of course,
wasn't Aquino? He was for those that don't know, probably out there, and you could probably explain it better than me, but he was used by the army to do like experiments in Vietnam to scare the people in the jungle and everything, right?
Psyops, yeah, he was very good too. So he was brought back to do the Roswell, and then he cranked up the thing on Roswell, and it eventually resulted in Roswell coming back as a town by being glad-handed to do. It became a tourist site, so it's now become a folklore that aliens landed at Roswell. But what they're really doing is hiding up the fact that there were all these war crimes committed by the U.S. Army. It was not only at Roswell, but the Battle of Los Angeles in 1952, where they vaccinated all the troops because they were afraid that Emperor Hirohito was letting go biological weapons over the city of Los Angeles. He wasn't. He was only trying to frighten them into peaceable terms, because the Japanese did not want war. The Americans had cut off the fuel supply, cut off their markets. The result of the Treaty of San Francisco was to open up American markets to Japan. He got what he wanted. He got peace with America and free markets with America. And Japan built up the greatest economy in the world as a result of Emperor Hirohito's deft planning and sophistication. And he allowed the Americans to promote that they won the war, but who cared? He had won the war. Hands down, he had won the war.
I know they were putting a lot of Japanese Americans in camps because I have a Japanese friend, that a really close friend of mine comes from a Japanese family, and his parents were in the camps.
Three generation U.S. citizens, Japanese, were deprived of their citizenship, put in camp, and most of them did not stay in America. They left, most of them, or they went to, and many of them went to Brazil.
No, mine they live in California.
Yeah, few of them stayed, but with good reason. So this is a book that's coming out. It'll probably be out in the next month in ebook format, and a few months after that we'll have it's called The Roswell Deception and Demystification of World War II. But to touch on Stanton Friedman, I met him at the Sci-Fi Cafe in probably 15, who knows how long ago. It wasn't 15, it was more like 10, 13 years ago. I met him there because he was a speaker, and I had given him a copy of Dr. David Anderson's DVD, Journeys into Time. And, he had talked to me. He had, he was at a table next to mine. We had our book tables next to each other. And I think he had asked me about the score.
Did he know who you were? He knew who you were?
Not really. I don't know. He treated me sort of indifferently, but then I think he asked me about the score of the World Series, and the San Francisco Giants were playing, and he had lived out in Berkeley, so I guess he was a fan of the San Francisco Giants, and we talked a little bit. I gave him this DVD, and the next year I saw him, and he had mentioned something about. I asked him if he'd seen if he watched the DVD I showed him. Yeah. And he said, "Oh, David Lewis Anderson." Blah, blah, blah. And then, I asked him if he would like to, because he had coughed up some negative information on Dr. Anderson in the past. So I had written to David Anderson while I was at the conference and asked him if
Did you know that before you handed him the DVD?
No.
Ah.
Well, I don't remember. I don't, probably.
Maybe you introduced him to who he was, and then he said something.
No. I remember there had been some nonsense going on. So anyway, because a lot of people would be attacking David. So I gave him the DVD, and then the next year I asked him, and he said,
"What inspired you to give him the DVD?"
Because of the nonsense I'd heard of going.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I remember specifically, but I gave him the DVD. The next year I asked him if he'd seen it. He goes, "David Lewis Anderson." I said, "Yes," and I got an email from David saying, yes, you can invite him to the camp, invite him to Atlanticron in Romania, because I think he had said that he had questioned David's credentials. He said that David was not, his bachelor's degree was phony. He wasn't a PhD, that he wasn't in the Air Force, and that, what else?
He researched it?
Oh, it wasn't research. It was lies. And he said that this.
No, I'm just saying, like, how did you know?
World Genesis Foundation was phony. It was a P.O. box in Rochester. Now, in fact, Wikipedia, which was controlled by Michael Latino, took off David Anderson and World Genesis Foundation from the Wikipedia.
Why was he trying to discredit this guy?
There was so much complaint by the kids that were part of the World Genesis Foundation in Atlanticron that they had to put it back up. And they took David Anderson's name off Wikipedia permanently. And then, so anyway, I had asked Stanton if, I said, David would invite you to the camp. You can go to Romania. You'll have your expenses paid. He continued to attack. And David then offered him, he says, look, I will meet you. He wrote him an email. He says, I will meet you, and I will, if I cannot prove that my credentials are true, I will pay you $20,000. He says, further, if I'm wrong, if you're wrong, I want you to pay $20,000 to the World Genesis Foundation. Stanton did not answer the email. He did not take it up. He was a bona fide scumbag acting as a true Satanist, as a true Satanist would. He was working for the government to discredit David Anderson, or whatever part of the secret government. That's who Stanton Friedman was.
You think he was for sure then used like as sort of like a disinformation agent for the government as well?
That's all he was. He was a disinformation agent, and as is Roswell. But a whole belief system has built up around Roswell.
Yeah. And not only that, a market too. People sell stuff, everything.
Yes. Interestingly enough, some of the true UFO zealots have been highly critical of some of the, like the mortician who examined the bodies, who was caught lying. He was caught lying. He did examine some bodies. He did have the small coffins, but those were for little Yakuza.
Yeah, there's a whole story of like the nurse that came out of the room that there was like a highly toxic smell or something, right?
She was fictitious. And
then he said she disappeared, right?
No, he admitted she was fictitious. He admitted it because he says, oh, I can't use her real name. But he didn't admit it till he was caught red-handed. So this is the problem. Roswell is a fiction that's created because the government is hiding how impotent it was against the Japanese. The Japanese is a culture that's 2,600 years old. It's much more evolved, even technically. They say that Japanese can only do knockoffs. Japanese aren't innovative. They only do knockoffs of American technology. This is not true. But it's a fiction because America, which is basically predicated on the white race, is very xenophobic, myopic, and stupid. So much of this aspect you see of what you would call cancel culture has a legitimate motive, but it doesn't go away. It doesn't execute it in an intelligent way. It ends up as genetic rage being inflicted upon white people, and it's generations down. But the truth needs to be acknowledged and told, and it's being told in a very rough and tumble way with this revolutionary astrology that is going on right now under the heavens. So
do you think Stan Friedman had connections with the Process Church? He was working with the Process Church?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. I wouldn't know how to connect him to that.
I think that because I think a lot of the, even like the Cult of Satan, all of them, I think they all have connections. They're linked with the Process Church and all of them.
This church was just one thing. I mean, it had connections beyond itself, but
that's what I mean.
Core organization that would have been, Satanism within the U.S. Army. U.S. Army is a much more what you would say focused central cult. Satanism within the U.S. Army, for sure. That's why Michael Aquino was so glad-handed by it and loved by it.
Well, I can't say a lot of it on the radio here. Maybe when we talk privately, but even my family member Lori, I've been doing readings, and her has been doing readings for many years. Myself for like 25 years, and we've also helped certain government agencies look for missing people before and help with cold cases. And during my work, during my and Lori for that matter, I've come across certain information that certain serial killers that are unsolved out there are linked to even the Process Church and other places out there and other satanic organizations out there. And I know a lot of these guys within these satanic cults are linked to that. It wasn't just I thought like literally like the Monster of Florence, different even that in all the way in Italy, and different ones in our United States are linked to all those, and it's interesting that people don't make those a lot of people don't make those connections, or they're swept underneath the freaking carpet by everybody, and it's kept a secret. It's horrible.
Well, the Army is, almost always right in the back of it, operating it.
Yep.
And Aquino was a,
Navy
U.S.
too.
Army colonel and deputy director of the National Security Agency. So that all gets swept under the rug, as you say, and not looked at. But that's part of what we're dealing with, and so much of what pervades the media. You'd be surprised at some of these newscasters who get so high and mighty, what they're involved with. It says they're sanctimonious, and when people are so sanctimonious, it tells volumes about them. It's like, what are they really doing? Why are they? How can they be so sanctimonious? Nobody was more sanctimonious than the Inquisition.
Yeah.
That's what they're promoting right now in the Congress. They're starting to suggest inquisitions to ferret out, people who want to kill certain people. That this is the era we're living in.
It's scary, when people don't even realize. I mean, even look with when Clinton was in office. Look at his wife Hillary. When as soon as Hillary became first lady, one of the advisors that she made right away was Robert Masters' wife. What's her name? Jean Houston.
I don't know these people.
They're writers on the occult, and as well, Robert Masters is a well-known author that did a lot of psychic research, and his wife is as well Jean Houston, and he wrote.
What was she told? What was her job?
She was like a advisor to Hillary Clinton, and this is even Oprah Winfrey had this lady on her show as one. She's like a psychic advisor, and she's a metaphysical. She was Robert Masters was a well-known psychic researcher. Even Edgar Mitchell, was friends with Robert Masters. Robert Masters wrote these famous books about the Sekhem energy and Sekhmet, the Book of the Five Ways, the Book of the Five Bodies, and he co-authored some books with Jean Houston, his wife, as well. Jean's still alive. She's in her 80s now. She's from New York as well. She lived in New York. And Robert died a few years back. But yeah, as soon as Hillary got in office, she appointed Jean Houston as like one of her advisors, and this is someone who was immersed in ritualistic activity with various archetypes. So, and even she was an advisor probably to Oprah and a lot of these people who are people don't know, people don't realize that, and it's crazy that people don't see this stuff about these people that are worshipped.
The whole relationship between Haiti and the Clintons can't be overlooked either. I'm trying to invade Haiti and not being very good at it. They get Clinton was not able to do what he wanted to do in Haiti. But yeah, there's always this deep occult side, and it's
people. Yeah, remember people used to link Haiti with even putting a hex on Kennedy with the Papa Doc Duvalier and all that, right?
I don't know about that, but Castro was very big into Santeria he was working with very high, Santeria brujos, and you can say that's one of the reasons he was so successful, because he overcame tremendous odds to maintain himself. And he was a little country who basically brought the United States and Russia down.
It's true.
How did he do that? I mean, he was a tough bastard.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting where the term bastard comes from too, right? I was talking about it the other day. It seems to come from the Egyptian Bast, right? Bast, right?
Yes,
right?
Because she believed in birth without
a male, right? Yeah.
Without qualification. So you have infinite births. Every creature on earth was sacred. So when you have a child who's born out of wedlock, the mother is Bast, because he or she is a creation of Pandora. Pandora is the same. Infinite birth. Everything is sacred. And then, of course, when you have structuring in society, which is Saturn, the god of time, you want structure, you want families, you want a certain cohesion that is structured and controlled. It has its positives and its negatives.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Peter, we have about 1:20 left, and I really appreciate you coming on. You being immersed in time travel and time travel education and information, where do you see on our timeline coming? How do you see everything turning out in the next few? Any good points before we close?
Slow revolution, a long, slow revolution to where the old has to give way to the new. And you can expect Star Trek culture to come more online when Pluto goes into Aquarius in 2024. But there will be a continuous revolution. I don't necessarily mean guns in the street, but a change. There might be some guns in the street, but there's going to be a lot of change coming up, and one has to adjust to the change. That's all one can do, is embrace the new and discard the old with intelligence.
Well, thank you for joining us, Peter. Guys, everybody, timetraveleducationcenter.com. See you next week.
I try and hold the sun.